I am Evelyn Langford, and I am currently employed as the Director for the Department of Human Resources for the American Samoa government, and I also have a dual role as the Governor's Authorized Representative for Disaster Recovery. And currently, the National Emergency Grant Program is housed under the Department of Human Resources. The initial work that began with looking at the NEG application was in response to the plant closure, the Chicken of the Sea tuna factory that was here. So that actually began in the summer of 2009. In working through the details of the application, right up to the end of September, we were still compiling the data and the information for the application. But then on September 29th, the earthquake tsunami had hit the island, which on September 30th, the cannery that was the official day of their closure. So both events became the basis for the application to the Department of Labor for the National Emergency Grant. Initially, in terms of trying to get the assistance, American Samoa had never received or had a national emergency grant. In fact, weren't even aware that that was available. In previous disasters, they had never applied for an NEG. So because of the work that began in the summer, we had some knowledge of what the purpose of the grant was. And with the tsunami, it was really determining how many applicants we were going to be in terms of work applying for, and what was the population we were dealing with. The magnitude of the disaster was unknown, so gathering all of the data in the initial few days was really important and quite a challenge. The week that the tsunami happened, we had our colleagues here from the Guam Department of Labor, so they had experience with national emergency grants, and their assistance to us was very valuable. They helped us identify the application, in terms of the application and the work that was to be done. And early on, it was identifying the requirements for the first component of the grant, which was the creation of jobs, temporary jobs, in direct response to the disaster. So because we'd never had a NEG available to us during a disaster, the availability of additional manpower was very helpful and beneficial to the territory in terms of the debris cleanup and the recovery. If we didn't have the funding from the grant, the labor requirements would have been absorbed by the government workforce, who already had their own responsibilities. So having the additional funding, we could hire individuals who weren't in a job. And because we're here in American Samoa, we don't have quick access to contractual services most other states do for cleanup. And so it was very helpful to have the additional assistance to hire people to assist with the cleanup. There were individuals who came into the program who were, let's say, hired in a volunteer capacity role, and then we brought them into the NEG program. So they may have started in one aspect of assisting with the recovery. From the experience with the disaster temporary job at a work site, they worked in the construction area. So we had volunteer organizations that were here on island, and they were helping in the villages to help repair homes that were damaged. Through that experience, they gained some extra skills and learned a new trade through an OJT arrangement, and with a particular company that these volunteer organizations were working with, they were able to be placed in a permanent job after the 1,040 hours with the temporary disaster job phase, and then went right into an OJT arrangement with the company, and then were able to be placed in permanent employment right after that. So that's one example, but that's multiplied many times over in different settings, whether it's construction or in the government or with a nonprofit organization or even the private sector, perhaps in retail. But the same kinds of instances have happened to where we're now probably almost 50% of placement in a permanent job from the program. We were fortunate and very pleased with the Department of Labor's approval of the 9010 OJT waiver, which Normally under the WIA, it's a 50-50 cost share between the employer and the grant. In this case, we had a waiver, a 90-10 waiver, so 90% covered by the grant and 10% by the employer. Having that available, that allowed our NEG staff to go out to the private sector employers, practically door to door with businesses, to explain the benefits of the waiver, and then basically that they would get a person that we could place in their company, and for 6 months, we'd assume 90% of that, and then enter to a contractual agreement, and to where it worked. I mean, I can't really recall an example as to where someone did not get hired. So it was a great benefit in that strategy, sending out our staff across the island from east, central, and west, meeting with the employers to explain the information. In the past, we would advertise, that an OJT grant was available, but it didn't seem to attract any of the employers. But I think the personal encounter really paid off. I think when we were trying to figure out, in meeting the second requirement of the grant, which was the workforce development, was really making use of the funding that we had left over from the disaster temporary jobs. So almost 50% of it went towards the employing the individuals in the disaster job component, and then coming up with meaningful workforce development strategies, whether it was creating new industry or optimizing the current the jobs that were available in the public and private sector. In looking at the state plan that we had, we had an opportunity to create new and emerging industries, and we partnered with the University of Hawaii Pacific Business Center program, who had done work in the Pacific, had a real good handle on the whole Pacific jurisdiction and workforce development, along with economic development, so they had that information. So I think trying to figure out what we were going to do with this funding to where it made sense, and then the outcomes associated with that was initially the challenge. We've kind of narrowed it down to industries that don't exist to perhaps replace the cannery industry, and in surveying pretty much what the needs are on island, the opportunities we see in the culinary. It's almost every Samoan knows how to cook, whether it's in a traditional umu or, but it's what they've grown up around. And it's almost natural for them to serve, in hospitality. That's almost second nature to them. So we thought by bringing that here to American Samoa in a formal institutional type of training setting, that we would help develop that. And then that's a skill that they could take anywhere in the Pacific, overseas, on any cruise line ship, any hotel. So that's one area that we have, I would say, been successful at, to where this week we'll be receiving a visit at the culinary school from the American Culinary Association, to where they would look at perhaps certification of the school, and it would become a formal training program with accredited certification tied to that, and they could go anywhere in the world with that certificate. The other industry is in the area of telecommunications, with either the contact center or even the fiber optic training, with the availability of funding that's come to American Samoa through the ARA. So leveraging that in helping to upscale the telecommunications abilities and capabilities of the people here, whether they're an incumbent worker or someone looking to learn a new trade or skill. That's an area that I think will be further developed through the NEG. The availability of the fiber optic cable resources here, I think it'll help us, as a government, it helps us to do our work more efficiently. I think a lot of costs could be saved in travel and all of that. The connectivity, the instant connectivity with either our neighboring islands or even abroad, you have opportunities that wouldn't have been available otherwise. And because we're so remotely located down here in the South Pacific from the rest of the continental United States, there are many other opportunities that can come as a result of that. whether it's through a contact center. I mean, traditionally, that's a hub that was normally in India, which now the Philippines are, have taken over that industry. But we see that being, that the individuals we have here, as far as the workforce development from high school and even our college students, this can be an area of work that they could work towards, and that skills that can be developed where they wouldn't have to leave American Samoa. Right now, the young ones who do leave are either through the military, through scholarships in athletics, or even academics. So there aren't other opportunities. It's not like we can go to the next state or the next island over to find employment. We have to come up with our own ways of creating the jobs here, or even throughout the Pacific jurisdictions. I think it forces us to be creative and to look at ways that we could develop and sustain our economy. Anyways, it's a cliche, but to think out of the box. And even if it means like regional collaboration with our neighboring islands or even the territories, we currently have a program. One of our trained service providers is in Guam, and there was a need there as part of the military buildup. So we saw it as an opportunity to perhaps migrate, individuals over there in the program. And between Governor Calvo of Guam and Governor Tulafono, they created this bridge there's a need over there, and they have a federal mandate to employ U.S. citizens or U.S. nationals, and priority given to American workers. So we branched out on that, and we have 30 participants who are getting trained in the construction field, and we're happy to say that they're halfway through the program, and about 8 of them out of 30 are now in permanent jobs. So that could also be an avenue that our young people or those looking for jobs can consider, whereas in the past it would have never been something that we would even thought of. But through this grant program, we've been able to branch outside of American Samoa to our neighboring islands. The region that I think would belong to extends all the way from American Samoa over to Saipan, Guam, within the bounds of the United States. And I say that because of the program, the grant, the requirements of the grant. We haven't looked too much over into the foreign countries, but that's kind of what we see as our region and the area in which we work within. We have, over the past 2-3 years, developed a regional collaboration with Guam and the Micronesian states. So that has become a very great relationship that we've been able to foster with them. And we hope that they too will see American Samoa in the future as perhaps a hub for something that maybe it's a contact center, maybe it's the culinary. But it's a great way to kind of leverage the resources and the capabilities that each of the territories have. There were restrictions because of how far we're located with the airfare and the transportation. If we were in the mainland, it wouldn't cost much to go from Arizona to the next state over. Here, we're talking about, one way, literally almost $1,500. So I think in that sense, we kind of get somewhat penalized because of the relocation cost, and I do think that if we had a little bit more flexibility to work that in terms of under supportive services, that wouldn't have hindered us so much from thinking, just being limited to the immediate geographical boundaries. But we could look beyond that, even into the places where there could have been greater opportunities. I think bringing the new industries that we've been able to bring to American Samoa with the culinary and the telecommunications and the contact center operations, those are things that never would have existed had this funding not been available from the grant. The expansion of our OJT program and the introduction of a work experience internship, these are allowable training activities that if we had not had the NEG, would not have been available to American Samoa. Under our WIA grant, we can only do so much because it's such a small grant based on the number of people that we have in American Samoa, nor does American Samoa qualify for the Wagner-Peiser Act. So this grant has provided in so many ways so much more than we could ever have had it not been available. One of the changes that we have to make is look at partnerships. With our workforce board, it's been somewhat inactive just because of the number of activities that have gone on trying to stand up a new NEG program and all of that. So it'll force us to look to the private sector, work with them more closely, look to other departments and agencies in terms of training resources that they have, and really synchronize the resources that we have in a way that it supports the state plan and perhaps support many of the outcomes that we identify from that plan. Under our WIA program, we have a workforce center, which kind of, in a little bit of a way, serves as a one-stop career center, but we don't have all of the partnerships under this arrangement. Through the One-Stop Career Center, this is something that was agreed upon in the scope of work with our training service provider, who is bringing the contact center operations. So they have other dealings with other states in One-Stop Career Centers. And by bringing that, by them being able to kind of infuse initial resources towards this, it will help to formalize our workforce center and perhaps become the central place for like state employment office, be the one place that private sector companies can advertise their positions. We do that informally right now, but this would kind of help structure the resources in one centralized location. And one thing that we are excited about is being able to offer Gold Star veteran services and really cater to our veteran population that is here in American Samoa. There are over 4,000 registered veterans here. So we hope to be able to help that and reach out to them, as well as other departments who have perhaps services, support services they offer in different areas, but we could bring them under one roof. Well, there is a draft bill that was prepared that we worked on over the last 2 years in reorganizing the Department of Human Resources to a Department of Labor. I'm not sure as to how that all came about as far as making it an HR department, but there are employment and labor functions under this department. So by changing the name of it, it'll become more focusing on the labor and the workforce development processes, with a small part of it going towards the HR piece for the government workforce. But we also intended to add some divisions to the department: wage and hour compliance, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and to bring back OSHA, mainly in a consultative arrangement, not enforcement. But their government and the private sector, there are lots of things, activities that go on that I believe almost infringe upon employer rights, and it's something that I feel that we need to do a better job of in terms of educating the private sector and the public sector agencies on employment labor laws and wage and hour compliance and all of those different activities. So that was Governor Tuafono's vision with that, and reorganizing the department to become a labor department. And hopefully it would allow us to perhaps look at some of the other Department of Labor grants that we aren't currently qualified at, just because of how we're structured right now. The Wagner-Peiser Act, Guam has the Wagner-Peiser Act, but American Samoa does not, and there's a labor exchange, activity in there. I don't know that the Department of Labor reorganized ourselves as that, because I believe it's a congressional, there's some statute that has to support that. But in that, it would force the issue of looking at the congressional, the CFR and all of those different things in terms of the things that American Samoa currently does not qualify as, but perhaps as a labor, structured as a labor department, it may qualify us for other things that we're just not aware of. But more importantly, protecting the workforce is what I think would be the most primary goal out of that. I would hope that in 5 years that we have a more formalized career path, if you will, from the high schools into the college and then into the workforce. That there would be training programs that will help create a path, if you will, for the students in the area of interest, whether it's the military or athletics or the fine arts or the trades, but that we would have programs that have been leveraged and fully coordinated among the agencies that have the resources to do this. And that's what I hope will happen in 5 years, that whatever a young person graduates from school, that they won't have to leave them to go to the mainland to find it, that they can actually stay here in American Samoa close to their family while pursuing whatever their dream may be. Well, the model that we've now used with Guam, I think has worked well. With American Samoa, we've learned over the past, just as early as when first Samoans joined the military, there's a cultural component of when you leave home in terms of the effects that it has on a young person, on a Samoan who leaves, their surroundings. And we saw it with the military when they left, went to boot camp, and they were not completing their boot camp because they were so homesick, and the culture, they missed the culture, missed their families. So by creating support networks through the churches and the communities in different places that are located near like an Army boot camp site or a military installation, that has seemed to work well. The missionary organizations that have established themselves provide the cultural and the family support network to these individuals who leave. The same thing has happened with those that depart for college. There's a community, a Samoan community nearby in most colleges. And so having developed the same partnership in Guam has also worked well. So if we were to expand beyond Guam and let's say Hawaii and California or some other places, it would be finding where those hubs are, where Samoan communities exist, and developing those communications to say that we can track someone when they leave American Samoa and they get to that place and have a kind of like a sponsor or a hosting family that would help them integrate and get transition into the community. And because we found that it works with those that leave for the military, and now in Guam, the same model can be applied, in any other place. There are practically Samoans who live almost in every state now, so it's finding out where they are. Yeah. We've received absolutely great support from our region, and because this is the first time American Samoa has had a grant, they've always been there to help us, guide us through the management of the grant, the reporting requirements, even considering things that maybe we wouldn't have thought of in developing our workforce development strategy. They've been very supportive and have encouraged the collaboration with our Pacific partners. And as I mentioned before, having the Guam Department of Labor colleagues here who have helped us at the initial submission of our application, and then even midway through, they provided some technical assistance with case management training and those things. So we're very grateful to them, and also in even asking the Office of National Response for modifications to our grant. So they've been very supportive, and we're thankful that they've been there to help us manage such a huge grant.